Today, we will talk about XLM and ZBCN. It has had a ton of hype that has been picked up by the riddlers of XRP, and the type of ship and the bearable guy stuff just happens to be a Zebec class. It is concentrating on tokenizing payroll, and it has been referred to by the CEO of Circle. And there are ties into Stellar as well, and the kinds of things that Stellar is involved in. I haven't really gotten into it or talked about it a lot because I just haven't really felt very confident with how quickly it has popped up and the amount of, I'll say, tribalism around it. However, I can at least provide my own personal commentary on it. It seems like there are a lot of the YouTube and Twitter types of influencers who are significant in the XRP community who have hopped on it. And here is a little bit about some potential ties into Stellar that I will explain more here in a little bit.
Stellar has had very similar aspirations to Zebec over the years, of course, with the advantage of being founded a few years before us, and they are truly a visionary within the payment space of crypto. So today we're working very closely with the Stellar team. We're part of their developer incubation program. We've received grants from them to build payment systems on their rails, and we're working on further connecting the XLM token into the Zebec payroll suite, as well as the Zebec card suite. And what's the interesting application here? Well, it's actually global remittance. So we've been working quietly behind the scenes on a number of global remittance tools because it makes a lot of sense given our network, our access to payroll, particularly in countries like in the US, which is kind of the source of remittance, and then the use of our cards in more developing economy, which are the recipients of the recipients. So Stellar has been really, really active in these efforts, and we will be actually making some more formalized announcements and releases with them over the next few weeks. I don't want to announce it here.
On the topic of the spaces, there has been some kind of screwy things pop up around that too. So from this May 7th space, it shows here that 126,000 people actually tuned in. However, the post itself only got about 36,000 impressions on X, and that could be compensated with posting on other platforms and things like that, but it is a pretty stark contrast. It makes a little more sense because it has about 267,000 followers on X, but still, that would equate to about 50% of the current audience actually tuning in. And I posted about a week ago that I didn't want to do a ZBCN review because I didn't really like it, and I don't want to just talk about things that I'm not particularly interested in, but it really caught my attention because there were more venomous replies than even the types who tend to post about XRP on the XLM content I have. So that kind of honestly got me a bit more interested in it. So according to CMC, it has performed fairly well over the last month or so with about a 300% increase in price. And over the last year, it's done about a 2x, and all time, it's about a 2x as well. It only has a market cap of about 331 million. So as a fintech-oriented token, that could end up as a potential opportunity. It is also called out here how they have been invested in by people like Circle, Coinbase, Solana, and a few others. And they are trying to provide a decentralized network for real-world value flow that is really concentrating on payroll. Here is the Zebec website itself, and it does have a pretty good amount of information on this. It talks about who they have worked with and how they're involved in pilots, and it also has a card, which I don't really have any problems with that. I do think the non-reloadable one is kind of strange. Like, why wouldn't you just have a reloadable card if you're expecting to get payroll via remittances and stuff? But I am not an expert on that. Here it is talking about how they're combining Web 2 and Web 3 type of processes. And once again, it is concentrating on payroll. And it appears as if it is essentially, as the person in the space has explained, it is an international payroll kind of an application, which then becomes a cross-border transaction comparable to what Ripple and Stellar do. It appears to have some on-chain storage and some smart contract-oriented security things. And it really kind of appears as if it's more of a governance token at this point in time off of what I have seen and with what I have picked up on, which does not mean that it does not provide value. Here is the newest white paper, version 3.1, which is online right now. And my honest take on this is I was pretty underwhelmed with what kind of content it had. It's presented to be more of a marketing presentation and a pitch compared to how the network actually operates and the current kinds of applications it's developing. However, that is not a thing that I'm too particularly concerned about, especially as a small project. Here it begins to talk about the technology, but it doesn't really explain how it works in a technical way, which might be exactly what they are trying for. Not a lot of people outside of the actual fintech tech types care too terribly much about how it works as long as you are able to provide an application that is able to help them. I did find it interesting how they called out a lot of things like real world assets, DePIN, and DeFi, but it didn't really expand upon it a whole lot, and it felt as if it was a little bit forced in there. It does call out what the kinds of applications are, but it doesn't really provide too much technical information on how it actually works. And the ZBCN token itself is an updated version of the ZBC token. So the Zebec Network is the Web 2, Web 3 kind of stuff, and the ZBCN token itself is essentially providing decentralized crypto access into those kinds of applications. It does have more information on the tokenomics, which don't really look too terribly different compared to a lot of smaller cap projects and companies, so that's not too terribly alarming. And it does explain a little bit more about the governance too. So it kind of seems to me that it's maybe somewhat comparable to Stronghold and with what currently is talked about with the SHX token itself. However, I am much more personally convicted in Stronghold just because of the history of the company itself and the specific people who are involved in that. So it does talk about the utility of the ZBCN token itself. The cards are probably the main thing at this point, where a card is essentially linked up with a crypto wallet. And there are staking and some DeFi use cases as well. Payroll Growth Partners is one of their most talked about partners or membership associates, however you want to explain that. They are one of the ones who are heavily involved. Like they're involved with Circle and WageLink, and that Web 2, Web 3 kind of an integration network. That in and of itself is what I would say I would be the most confident in terms of Zebec as a company. If you're interested in more information, I would check out Blackroot and Jetpack because they have been posting a lot on this, and in all honesty, it's been a lot of new information and it hasn't ended up in the niche kind of topics that I have ended up in, and I just haven't really kept up on it a whole lot. Now, I do want to talk about the announcement that they're trying to be more integrated with Stellar, because a lot of things that Stellar is really being involved in right now revolve around stablecoins and real world asset tokenization on top of the whole cross-border payment thing, which they have built everything else upon. Bridge, who is a partner of Visa and Stellar, has rolled out a stablecoin card issuing product. So that is kind of performing the same kind of a thing that Zebec cards are. And I'm personally not too excited about a card that gets linked to a crypto wallet. It is an extremely positive indicator of potential adoption, but I think that a lot of payments will revolve around stablecoins with the tokens like XLM, XRP, and potentially ZBCN playing more of a bridge asset kind of a role. Now, Stripe is also extremely interconnected into Stellar, and they are also involved with Bridge, especially in real world asset applications. Here is an article on Bridge, Stellar, and AirTM, which I think is how you pronounce that is actually talking about payroll. So it seems as if Stellar is working with people who are concentrating on stablecoins a bit more. And here is a post on how Stellar is concentrating on that topic again. And it is coincidentally in Argentina, where the UNHCR and Stellar are expanding into. So I do want to present some of the things I found that might possibly outweigh the potential positives here. So it really doesn't seem as if the Stellar co-involvement and co-production of product has really gotten that far as of the end of April 2025. They received $50K from the Stellar Community Fund, but there's apparently no smart contract integration, there's no on-chain contract, there's no code available on GitHub. And I did actually see that there were some older links and some posts on X that went back to the Stellar site, and they didn't actually work. So that was kind of concerning. I didn't specifically call it out in the white paper. However, they were talking about a layer 3 network and application that was apparently sold to a company that is only run by one person. I don't get personally concerned about this kind of stuff, especially with how early it seems that they're actually in the crypto oriented end of things compared to just using either Stellar or Solana in their own platform. It just seems to point more towards the ZBCN token itself isn't as ultimately necessary as something like an XLM or a Sol. Here's one person's response related to them inquiring with MasterCard, and they replied that they were not aware of Zebec, which isn't really that surprising because it's kind of a tangential connection because of their membership with the Circle stuff. But probably one of the more concerning things for me is that the original founder was behind Movement Labs XYZ, which didn't really perform well, especially with retail. And all of the co-founders have apparently parted ways with the project and the company. The guy did actually respond, and there are two sides of every story, and I 110% understand that. It's just not exactly inspiring a ton of confidence. And here is that referred again, and it is 100% right that the specific issue there didn't really have anything to do with Zebec as a company or the ZBCN token itself, but it's just, in my own opinion, a cause of concern for what could potentially happen here. I didn't really keep up with this because it had a lot of XRP army stuff, but there was some partnership with White Rock, and then White Rock was pushing its own token, and then it had an unregistered stablecoin, and then there was some talk about White Rock not ever actually confirming that the partnership was a real thing, and it was just extremely odd. And I won't word for word explain a lot of the counter arguments here because a lot more up to date on this. I have had a few other people reach out to me and express the same kind of concerns as well, but the crux of the matter really comes down to the fact that the ZBCN token really isn't required for the payment network to actually operate. It is within the Zebec network itself, but it's really just being used on the card end of things. And a lot of these kinds of applications are beginning to move towards stablecoins. So will a ZBCN linked card hold up over time? Will that actually get a lot of adoption? I'm not sure. And I would think that stablecoins will probably end up as the preferred payment methodology, with these other network tokens providing the functionality of a bridge asset. A weird thing that I picked up on as well is that they posted this in April 2025, and it was some performance information, how things have expanded, and it seemed to be essentially the exact same and 50% less cards issued than it was in August of 2024. So, with all of the expansion and adoption and stuff like that, where is it actually coming from? In my own opinion, the responses are kind of a workaround and don't provide tangible information. So, yeah, we get back to founder CEO guy and his history. I did explain that he had offered an explanation, but the information here is a little bit more specific to Zebec as a company. The L3 Nautilus, the Explorer, was shut as of 2023, so I don't know if things have changed, if they're still working on things, but that would be a little concerning, especially if you pair it up with the fact that it was sold off to a company or a person that didn't really seem to have a lot of obvious involvement or connections. It did have a lot of hype probably almost a month ago now, where a lot of people were saying that it was becoming a partner with Circle, and that's not entirely true. And I don't think that the company themselves called themselves a partner. I think the online community really picked up and ran with that. As we can see here, they clearly called out that they are a member in the Circle Alliance program, which is still important. So ultimately, there's some things that revolve around acquisitions and conflict of interest and the timing of the change in ZBC over to ZBCN, which is really when I was beginning to pick up that it kind of reminded me of a WadsPay thing, and I got a lot of hate on that. And ultimately, I'm not saying that it is purposefully malicious or that they are trying to hide everything, but I'm not extremely confident in it, and I will stick with things that I spend a lot more time learning about. However, it could still perform extremely well when we're in the heat of alt season, and it does appear to have a lot of hype, which can help its performance even more.